I want to welcome everyone here tonight. It is 5 o'clock. We're ready to begin our meeting. I would ask the clerk to please announce the meeting and call the roll.
You're hereby notified that I have called a special session of the Unified Government to be held Thursday, August 28, 2014 at 5 o'clock p.m. regarding public safety recruitment process, and at 6 p.m. Police Department proactive community involvement. Roll call: Gilbert,
Here.
Walker,
Here.
Townsend,
Here.
McKiernan,
Here.
Regia,
Here.
Maddox,
Here.
Payne,
Here.
Barkley,
Here.
Walters, Collins.
Here. All right, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. As the call announced, tonight at the 5 o'clock, I'm going to share a timeline and a process that I've been working through with the Department of Justice in terms of our public safety recruitment. At 6 p.m., we're going to hear from Police Chief Hansen about proactive community involvement. The 6 o'clock really stemmed from Commissioner Townsend reaching out following the events in Ferguson to talk about what are the things that our police are doing proactively so that we don't have a situation of that kind here in our community. So the police chief has done a great job putting together a proposal tonight. We will hear that at 6 and walk through that. The 5 o'clock, I want to talk about the public safety recruitment, and this is something I've been working on since November 21st of last year. So you all have a timeline in front of you. I want to walk through that timeline just to give folks an idea. This issue first was sparked in my mind by the fire recruit graduation on November 21st. There were 26 recruits at that time. There's a total of 42. We will have another graduation coming up in a couple of weeks in September for the rest of that class, but it's a total of 42. And as everyone has stated, I'm very proud of the recruits that we have, very qualified, very capable people who are going to do a great job for our community, and we're delighted to welcome them as employees of the unified government. One of the things we did notice, and a number of commissioners recognized it with me, was that of the 42 graduates, there were no African Americans in the group. And in a community that's 27% African American, that should be a concern. And there's also one woman, and I think that we need better gender diversity as well. As I looked into that, I began talking internally with staff in December, speaking with the county administrator, fire chief, human resources. And as I dug into those numbers even further, another layer of concern for me was that of the 42 hires, only 25% attended high school in Wyandotte County. And so there are a lot of qualified people in Wyandotte County looking for jobs who would be qualified for these jobs. And for whatever reason, there's a disconnect. Either our students aren't aspiring towards these great careers, or we're not doing a good enough job recruiting, or both. And so we need to get to the bottom of that and evaluate what that gap is about. At the Martin Luther King event on January 20th, I announced publicly my intent to look into this situation and reached out at that point to U.S. Attorney Barry Grissom. And Barry Grissom immediately offered his support for the process and offered any support that he could provide. Through him, made the connection to the Department of Justice, and on February 25th at my State of the Government announced that I would be bringing in the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is, the reason behind that is twofold. Number one, they have the expertise. They've worked in these areas with similar situations across the country. There are a lot of communities that are doing this very well, and I think the Department of Justice can help us evaluate how well we're doing as a community and how we can make changes. They also bring a level of credibility to the conversation, again, because of their experience and because of their expertise. So announced that I was bringing in the Department of Justice. We have met 3 times in really what I would consider a data gathering capacity. That data gathering, we had one in April, one in July, and one in August, just earlier this week, leading up to tonight's announcement. In the midst of that process, all of us have been touched by the crisis in Ferguson, Missouri, and I think that crisis has reintroduced my resolve to get to the bottom of this, because I think a lot of that crisis, in addition to a tragedy of a young man's life being lost, it exposed a disconnect between the public safety and the community in that community. And when we look at that kind of disconnect, I want to make sure we're doing everything we can in a proactive way for all of our public safety departments to fully represent our community. That initial data gathering group have included the people listed here below, 2 folks from the Department of Justice, Ms. Rita Valenciano and Derek Dean, myself and some of my staff, Mr. Doug Bach, our county administrator, and some of his staff. Renee Ramirez at Human Resources has done a tremendous job pulling together a lot of materials for us, has put countless hours in with her and her team, has done a great job. We've also had our Sheriff, Don Ash, our Chief of Police, Ellen Hansen, our Chief of Fire, John Paul Jones, have all been very active and engaged in this process and looking at finding the data in terms of how to move forward. I've also had some community members, Reverend Jimmy Banks, Bill Miller, who is a former UG commissioner, Irene Cadillo from El Centro, David Smith is a representative from District 500 School District, as well as 2 members from the NAACP, Cedric Patton and Virginia Sewing. So there are several of those members who are here in the audience tonight, and I appreciate your coming because of the work that you have done. What I want to turn to now, and then I'll go to the next section in a moment, I want to turn your attention to the 2 charts that are attached to this. This has been part of the data gathering information that we have done. I believe we made copies for the audience, and if you don't have one personally, if you could share so everyone would have a chance to look at that. You saw a similar kind of bar graph in the Kansas City Star on Sunday in response to the Ferguson issue, looking at different cities' populations and the demographic, and then looking specifically at the police department. One of the things we've done is not only look at our population, look at our UG employees as a whole, and then look at sheriff, police, and fire in terms of the diversity represented there. The issue is pretty clear in looking at the graph. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Our city is about 40 to 42% Anglo, about 27% Black, about 28% Latino, and about 7% Asian and Pacific Islander. When we look at our overall UG employees, we're about 68% Anglo, 18% African American, 9% Latino, and about 5% Asian American or Pacific Islander. When you look down at the sheriff, police, and fire, I was interested to know that the sheriff actually has a higher level of diversity in the sheriff's department than in the rest of the unified government. Also, when you look at the police, on the other hand, the police have significantly less diversity. And then when you look at the fire department, it's significantly less than that. And so one of the things that we need to do is find out what are the barriers to having a fully inclusive public safety department and what we can do to work together with our community partners to move that forward. The next page shows gender diversity within the departments. And I think nationally you will see that public safety tends to be a male-dominated field overall. That doesn't mean there isn't progress being made around the country. And certainly the sheriff, again, has the most gender diversity. And then the police has about half that, and the fire has about half that. So in terms of gender diversity, this is another area that I think we can work on in terms of our recruiting efforts and our hiring practices to make sure that we fully represent our community. So coming back to the front page and the timeline, I'm proposing tonight to put together a larger community task force that would be public meetings, that would have a representative from each UG commissioner. I'd like to ask each commissioner to appoint someone to this task force. If you'd like to appoint yourself, you can. That would be fine, as long as no more than 3 or 4 commissioners do that in terms of having a quorum at meetings and such. Sunshine laws, we need to be thoughtful about that. But if you are passionate about this, I know some of the commissioners are, you're welcome to appoint yourself. There are others who are passionate about it but don't have the time to serve themselves, and so certainly sympathetic to that, but would hope that every commissioner would make an appointment to this, keeping in mind one of the things the task force suggested, the data gathering group, was to be thoughtful about making sure we have some younger people in the discussion, folks in their 20s and 30s who could contribute as well, because a lot of us just aren't in our 20s or 30s anymore. I'll stop with that. We also want to make sure the community college is at the table. They're a partner right now in our training, both for our police academy and for fire. We want to make sure they're engaged. We want to make sure Donnelly College is involved, as well as all the Wyandotte County school districts. That would include the public and private schools. We want is whoever would like to be at the table to work on this with us as possible. I know District 500 is working towards a public safety academy that they would hold within their high schools, which would help recruit for all three. There are a lot of great ideas out there. We need to make sure we're providing those programs the support they need. I also want to make sure there's members of all three public safety unions. The police FOP, the sheriff FOP, as well as the fire union, to make sure that the leadership teams of those three unions are present. I also want to make sure we have representatives from each of the black firefighters, black police officers, and the Latino police officer associations. So that can give us a broad perspective of people who are in the field who would have a good idea in terms of how to move this initiative forward. The task that I'm proposing is on the bottom of that front sheet. They would begin in October, hold a couple of public forums, whether that's 1, 2, or 3, I would leave it up to that group, to gain community-wide input so that everyone in the public would have an opportunity to come to the microphone and share their thoughts about the issue. Evaluate our current practices and then develop an action plan. And the action plan needs to include concrete steps that we can take as a governing body to move this issue forward. I'm asking for a completion date in 6 months in April of 2015 for this task force work. I have experience with committees that if you want to kill something, you put it on a committee and it'll die a slow, painful death. If you make it a task force with a beginning time and an end time, they have their task ahead of us and they can actually move forward. The other piece is I want to make sure that it's done in April so we have due time for consideration if there are budget implications that come forward, that we will have ample time to consider those. We all know that things that come up in July are very difficult to work into that year's budget, and I don't want to wait an additional year before we take corrective action, whatever that might be. So that's my proposal. I want to open it up to the commissioners for conversation or questions or comment. Commissioner Kane.
Thank you, Mayor. I like the idea about getting this many people in the community involved, especially union folks, and I will appoint myself to that committee.
Fantastic. Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Kane. Commissioner Townsend.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say in response to some questions about the timing of this. Timing is everything. And I would just like to commend the mayor for moving on something that he saw needed to be addressed way before Ferguson. It seemed to me from the observations from the media that Ferguson is a mini hydrant problem. It's not only in Ferguson, but we've had incidents in New York, Florida, throughout the country, California. And one aspect of that is how the public service sectors looked. So I'm happy that this commission and the mayor at the head of this have taken the bull by the horns long before that and moved to include the public to do something about it in a proactive way. So I appreciate that. I'd also like to say that last year I spent a couple of hours getting to know Chief Paul, the fire department chief. He was very receptive. I wanted to know what some of the barriers were and what the situation had been with regard to increasing the number of minorities. And Chief Hansen, in her tenure, has been very receptive. And again, I think it's important that some of the issues we've seen around the country be addressed by our police chief, people in authority who can thwart, if possible, some of the actions and the misunderstandings that occurred. So thank you to the commission, the mayor, for his guidance, and both chiefs. And we look forward to resolving and coming to a resolution that's going to make all of our community feel engaged, protected, and respected. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other comments? Any questions? All right. Well, I have a very simple goal, and I've shared this with the data collecting group, and I'll share it with you all tonight. My very simple goal is that because Kansas City, Kansas leads the metro and leads most of the nation in diversity in our community, I expect our public safety to lead the nation in diversity as well. I'm looking forward to, when we put these components in place, that other communities will be coming to Kansas City, Kansas, asking us how we did it, and how we can implement it as well. We need a replicatable model that's usable around the country. I think the community deserves that, and I'm very excited about the fact that we have an opportunity to step out and really do something dynamic and something that's really going to be great for economic development for our community. Hiring our jobs, I've talked about this before, that when Cerner comes in or General Motors starts a new shift or all these companies come in, we always incentivize hiring local. And I want to make sure that our city is leading the charge in that, making sure that our city is hiring local. That's great for economic development. That's great for our community. And I think that's going to pay dividends down the road. Commissioner, did you have a statement you want to make? Go ahead.
I just wanted to know, and thank you, I just wanted to know, had you or staff decided the main time that the meeting would take place? Meetings would take place?
No, we have not established the meeting time at this point. That may address who you appoint, is that right? Yeah, I think we need to, I'm open to suggestions. I tend to think, my experience with these meetings is late afternoon from like 4 to 5:30 or 5 to 6:30 tends to work. People can often take off a little bit early from work and still be there and be engaged, and we can have crossover with staff here as well as appointees. So we can work out a time that's going to work best for everyone. Yes.
Just one more procedural question. By when would you like to have the commissioners make their appointment, and to whom should we send that information?
That is great. If you could do that in the next 2 weeks and send that directly to my office, and I would send it to Mayor Holland at wicokck.org and send it directly to me, and we will gather those names and assemble the list. Thank you. I already have Kane's written down, so Mr. Kane, you do not have to email me. I mean, you're welcome to. I'm always glad to hear from you.
okay.
All right. Any other? Okay. Anyone else interested in comment? All right. Well, I want to thank the commission. We've been talking about this. I've been talking about this. We've been talking about this on and off since last November, and I appreciate the support, and I appreciate the opportunity to move us forward. So if there are no further questions or comments, then we will close this portion of the meeting. And we had allocated a full hour, but I think we can move directly to Chief Hansen's report with the police department. So Chief, if you would come forward at this time. As she's coming forward, I'll reiterate that this was brought forward by Commissioner Townsend, concerned about what had happened in Ferguson, to ask what kind of response, proactive response, the police are making to these. And I would say the tragedy was one piece. How it was handled after that and the follow-up in the community is another piece, and I'm hoping we can address all those today. Commissioner Townsend, would you like to say any introductory comments?
Thank you, Mayor. In particular, I had requested that Chief Hansen address such issues as use of force. How are our officers taught with regard to methodologies, stun guns, tasers, firearms? When is the deployment of each of these types of items appropriate? I've had complaints from community members in my district about the way officers had approached them or spoken to them. So I've asked the chief to address what is the training that officers are given with how to approach citizens who are innocent until proven guilty, so that they can be brought to justice and not to the undertaker right off. Given that I know that our officers put their lives on the line every day, so I appreciate that they are often in very precarious, life-threatening situations. Nevertheless, we want to know what the training is so that people they encounter who they may have a reasonable belief have committed some act against the law are brought to justice. before jurors in a court of law. I've also asked the chief to address efforts that began way before Ferguson incidents with regard to community outreach that the police department has done. What are they currently doing? What is forecast in the future? And certainly this goes to the issue sometimes of money, as the mayor has already made mention of. We talked a couple of months ago, or maybe a little bit less than that, in the cost for putting cameras in the cars and other equipment that could, in a situation such as Ferguson or others, make the difference in validating what actually happened in any situation. So, having said that, I think those were some of the top, and I appreciate again Chief Hansen's openness and willingness to go forward. I've heard from members of the police department that she has brought a new perspective, and with her departure, hate to see her go, but that will come. I think what the mayor has already talked about earlier tonight and her presentation today, I hope will set the tone and tenor as we look for a permanent person to fill that role, so that they know Kansas City, Wyandotte County is actively expecting to have all of their citizens represented on the force and treated with respect. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. All right, Chief, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, it is really exciting for me to be here tonight to talk about this topic and take this opportunity to let you know a little bit more about how the police department works, what's important to us, and our goals not only now but in the future. I brought some staff members with me here tonight in case you ask some really detailed policy questions that I need some support with, because having only been here since January, I haven't been through training, I haven't worked on the street and used force, so I understand the broad strokes and the basics, but in case we need to drill down a little bit further, I have good backup here. So, and I appreciate them being here. One of the things that I talked about this morning at Livable Neighborhoods is the fact that we do feel really good about the relationships we have with the community and how that would help us if we would have, and then I corrected myself, I said it's not if, it's when we do have an officer-involved critical incident, because it will happen. And so the relationships are there, but I think that one of the things I'd like to help you understand tonight is the fact that we do have a number of situations daily that could result in not only a use of force, but a justified lethal use of force. And I'll give you just a little bit of data, and I'm not going to give you too many facts and figures tonight, but so far this year, since January 1st, we have had 426 gun crimes. 23 of those, we had 23 persons killed. The vast majority of those were with a weapon. We've had 97 persons shot but survived. We've had 197 persons threatened with a firearm but not shot. We've had 109 incidents that resulted in 198 victims of crimes where it was people shooting into a dwelling. 154 of those victims were adults, 44 were juveniles. So I only offer that as a backdrop to tell you that there are a lot of weapons out there in the hands of people who are more than willing to use them. I also want to share just one little incident with you. Last weekend, we had a situation where officers were called to an armed disturbance at a party, and an individual was randomly firing off a gun. He took off, the officer chased after him, was able to get him into custody. No one was hurt. These are the things that happen almost every day here, much less everywhere else, you don't hear about those. You hear about the encounters that go badly. I read the reports every day, and I read about those situations. So I'd like to offer that as an example of the fact that the potential is there. If that person would have turned and pointed that weapon or turned in a threatening way towards that officer, he would have been completely justified in firing his weapon. So we're going to talk a little bit later about lethal force. One of the things that has happened since Ferguson is we have really ramped up our contact with the minority community. I take no credit for the past relationships, but I tell you what, when I got here, and I've said this a dozen times to different groups, one of the things that impressed me about this community is the partnerships and the involvement of the community with the police department. Everybody here knows I worked in Johnson County for many, many years. Great, it's a great community. In Johnson County, the community approach, for the most part, is police department, we have a problem, please fix it. Here, it is police department, we have a problem, how can we work with you to solve it? That is an amazing resource that exists here and has existed for years, and that's why I say I take absolutely no credit for that. We're going to talk about some of the things we do on a routine basis, but first I'm going to talk to you about some of the things we have done since Ferguson. The minute that we started seeing those news reports broadcast, we started planning a strategy of how are we going to make sure that we know what our community is thinking about that particular act. So we reached out, and my staff pulled together a group of about 30 minority community leaders, many of them from churches, and we invited them to the police department and spent almost 3 hours with them having a candid, no-holds-barred conversation. And I think it's important to note, we didn't just invite all the marshmallows. We invited people that we knew were going to hold our feet to the fire because we wanted to hear the actual facts. We wanted to hear what they were hearing. We wanted to hear what they've been thinking and what their constituency that they associate with had been thinking. So we did that. Then we had an invitation to FBI headquarters here in Kansas City, Chief Forte, myself, and the chief from Topeka, because we're the 3 local communities that have the highest minority population. We invited some of our community leaders to go with us, sat down in a room, and had a fantastic presentation by 2 of their staff members who happen to be attorneys. One about what is lethal force and when is it justified. And what made that so meaningful to me, there's a lot of misinformation and misinterpretation about what is lethal force and when can it be used. When I hear people in the audience ask me, why do you train to shoot to kill? We don't do that. We train to neutralize the threat. And so a lot of the control over that situation and what happens is in the hands of the person that we are encountering. So that was an eye-opener to me that a lot of people just don't understand. And so tonight we're going to try to shed some light on that. And then we had Sunday night, there was a meeting. It was a men's forum, but I crashed it. And it was the emergency meeting, Don't Shoot, held at the Seventh-day Adventist Church at 33rd and Parallel. And it was fascinating to me. A lot of really good questions. They had a panel that included Commissioner Maddox, included Major Garner, and a lot of good information. What really impressed me is this was a group of middle-aged, very responsible gentlemen. And when the narrator said, everyone who has been, or who thinks they've been racially profiled, who has had an uncomfortable situation with the police, please stand up. The vast majority stood up, including some of the police officers that were in the room. So the message here is there are issues. So when I tell you we're so proud of the relationship we have with our community, I want you to also know we have work to do. We have work to do on both sides of the equation. I think that one of the things about force that I like to share is that is part of, we've got to have all of those methods and all of those tools in our toolbox. Every officer has to have that when they come to work. Just like if you're a plumber, you go to your truck, you take out your toolbox, you go in, and you work on the problem. So that is a must for us. But I think it's also important for members of the community and for you all to understand, every officer that shows up hopes they don't have to open that box on every shift. And every officer that shows up deserves the right, as they are doing their job and doing it correctly, to go home safely to their family every night. So this is a very complicated issue. And I'm excited to be here because I feel like I have really listened to the community since I've been here, and I really know police officers. And I've worked very hard to get to know this group of police officers. A lot of excellent, excellent people. They work very hard every day to keep you safe. They work very hard every day to connect with the community. And I'm going to give you my second little set of facts and figures. Everybody knows we have a community policing unit, and the community appreciates them greatly. They work hard. They work hard, and we spend very little money extracting their services, because during their tour of duty, or they adjust their tour of duty so they can attend, just this since January, 577 community meetings. 577. That's just our community policing group. 78 community special events, 56 special community programs, 28 neighborhood cleanups. And I don't know if you all are aware that we do this, that we work side by side with members of the community to clean up neighborhoods. Today I was at a meeting and I heard Captain Lawson, who's the commander of the community policing unit, talk about one of his officers, Sarah Lopez, who works very hard, working very hard on her own initiative, figuring out a way to solve a homeless problem underneath one of our bridges in the interstate. So these are committed people. This is what they love to do, and they do it full time. So that connection, strong. Besides that, we have a lot of people during their regular duties that spend time connecting with the community. You know, we like to think of ourselves as crime fighters, but we really are. Our profession is part social worker, part crime fighter, and it's a big portion of problem solving. The vast majority of our calls for service are not crimes in progress. They're people who need help. So, you know, during their normal duties, every one of our patrol districts has a citizens advisory board, and they meet with them. And they meet with them monthly. And if you are lucky enough to be on the advisory board for East Patrol, Captain Young cooks you a meal. So, you know, that's an added little perk. This morning I mentioned livable neighborhoods. That's it's a fabulous group made of all of the neighborhood groups that work very hard with the police to improve things for their specific community. They also, in operations, have coffee break meetings with local pastors. They have one-on-one visitors. They invite the pastors to attend roll call. These are all opportunities not only for us to get to know people in the community, but community members to understand a little bit more about who we are, because we're regular people, and what we do and why. We work closely with the apartment managers to help them when they have problem renters, to work with the people who live there to make that a safe and good place to live, all of our apartment complexes. We work with Fairfax and with the downtown shareholders to work on any kind of issues they have there and connect with the people that are involved. When I talked about special events, we were there to celebrate new bus routes. We attend park events, library functions. We stop in and visit, hopefully, with local mom and pop stores, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And we're there when soccer fields open, football fields open, and the BPOA has gone to events like the Juneteenth celebration, handed out hot dogs, and they deliver food minority officers and female officers, which we do consider ourselves a minority, they take food to people who are in need, and they follow up on calls where the crime's done, it's solved, the case is solved, but there are children in the home that need something extra. And so they follow up on those calls and make sure that those children have some support and whatever that something extra is that they need. And, I could go on, but, you all know we have a great Citizens Police Academy. That thing requires a big time commitment. But what we're doing as part of our post-Ferguson planning is coming up with a little curriculum that we can take on the road. And we have told community groups, if you want us to come, invite us. And we will come and give you maybe a mini version of some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. We have a great junior police academy at in the high schools. And we also, you're aware of the cadet program. It used to be big, and this is one of those budgetary things. It used to be 25, 30. Now we're shrunk down to 5. But that can be a fantastic experience for young people. We're getting ready to recruit good people for that program, 18. They're in there till they're 21, and then if all has gone well, they can transition very easily to be a police recruit. So that just gives you a little idea about things that we're doing. We're not doing that in response to Ferguson. We're doing that because that has always been an important element of making our jobs effective and successful. Because without the community, we cannot be successful. And we know that when it comes to trust and relationships, we have to carry the burden of that responsibility, take what we have to the community, and kind of build those bridges. So that's kind of my background of here are the things that we're doing, and here's why we have and why I have been so impressed by the groundwork that's been done before I got here, building those bridges and seeing how the community really is so responsive. So the other things, now we'll move on to what the meat of the matter that Commissioner Townsend really is interested in. When we talk about force, I want you all to know that I have been reviewing the use of force summary report for 2013. And in 2013, we arrested 14,906 persons, and of those, almost 15,000, there were 252 incidents during these arrests that required force. In 2013, 93% of our uses of force were verbal direction. Now, you all may say, no, wait a minute, verbal direction, why is that a use of force? But in our force continuum, that is, the lowest threshold. 4% were pressure point techniques. Those are techniques to gain control and compliance. 68% were muscling techniques. That's when you really got to get a hold of somebody and use some special areas of pain compliance. 11% were hand or leg strikes. Back when I was a police officer, that's all you had was your nightstick. And so you struck. That was almost 100% of our uses of force, unless it was lethal force. And then 10% of our uses were joint locks. So in 2013, we had 3 incidents of the deployment of lethal force. And I'm going to tell you what those 3 are because I think it's pretty illustrative. In number 1, the suspect pinned the officer's leg with the vehicle. The officer drew and pointed the weapon, didn't use it. Anytime we draw a weapon, anytime we have any use of force, that officer has to fill out a use of force report, and it goes through an administrative review. If we need to retrain, if there's discipline involved, that comes from there. The second, the suspect pointed an AK at the officer, an automatic weapon. The officer fired at the suspect, who was not hit. He escaped and was later arrested. So these don't always result in death. The third one was a suspect attacked an officer with a baseball bat, and he was lethally wounded by a gunshot. And I think that is something that we need to spend a little bit of time on. When you talk about lethal force, people almost automatically go right to the weapon, to the gun. lethal force is justified, as I said, whenever there is a threat. When an officer feels that he must use that force to protect his life or the life of an innocent other, then it is justified. Not just when someone points a weapon at you. And we've had some conversations about knives. And the rule of thumb, you know, for knives is if you can put distance or an object between you, that's great. But if you're in close quarters, you know, then lethal force is justified. If you are in an encounter with someone who is martial arts trained and can actually kill you with their hands or feet, and you are at a disadvantage and you know, if you can't fight, you can't win that fight, you are justified in using lethal force. So we look at this, I think, sometimes through a very simplistic lens. If somebody points a gun at you, you know, should you shoot? At this meeting where people were talking about shoot to kill, we had a lot of questions about why don't you shoot the gun out of people's hands? You know, we don't, you know, this is not on TV, and if you've got to understand that these, you know, these.
Well, this is on TV.
Well, this is, yeah, right. These officers, as I said earlier, they are people too. And when you are involved in a lethal force incident, you have autonomic, you know, physical responses that you can't control. We are not like Dirty Harry, calm, cool, collected, you know, or looking for a reason to use that weapon. You know, that's not the real world. So you have to understand, that's why we train shoot, center, mass. Because talking about distance, talking about your handshaking, talking about all of the emotion, you know, this is the best target. This is the most effective target. When we were at the FBI the other day, they were talking about a shooting that they had in Miami a number of years ago, where actually the suspect was shot. The shot was actually lethal, but you can keep going and squeezing the trigger for a few seconds. So that's why we shoot to neutralize for a threat like that. So lethal force is always never the same, and it's always a very troubling proposition when you're looking at it from the outside. It's a troubling proposition from the inside too, because I will tell you, there is no police officer that comes to work and says, I hope today's the day I get to shoot somebody. If you've known officers that have been involved in taking someone's life, it changes them forever. It as far as religious principles, as far as so many different things, you carry that burden forever, even when you are 100% justified. So it is not a simple proposition from the officer's point of view either. And what we try to do, and I think probably one of the best way, you know, to help you all understand a little bit of this, we have a 15-page use of force policy. And we train on all elements of this. Everybody must go through annually, you know, recertification with firearms, recertification with tasers, recertification on all of the physical techniques that we use. We take it very, very seriously. We want people to have these tools. We want them to be trained to use them appropriately. When we talk about deadly force, let's see if I can find this part here. And when that, you probably have it right there, when it's justified. I'm going to let Major McMillan talk a little bit about deadly force when it's justified.
Sir, if you can speak directly into the microphone.
Let me just pull it up here real quick.
Cut him cut off. Go.
That's correct. So if I understand the question and the answer is that deadly force, and then there's lethal force, and then there's serious use of force. But deadly force is, we use a concept that is modeled after all other professional police departments called the 1+1 theory, meaning that we're going to train our officers to meet a force with equal or greater force. So the simple answer would be is that if somebody comes at us with a weapon, we're not going to try to talk to that person at that moment. We're going to meet that with an equal force or a greater force. One thing that is important, I think, for most people to understand is that are alternate weapons, whether you call it a baton or the OC spray or the taser, none of those are 100% effective. However, a knife or a bullet that is traveling at the officer is always effective. And so we're not going to meet a lethal force encounter, i.e. somebody with a knife or a baseball bat or an automatic weapon, and then deploy the OC spray on them, because we know it's not going to probably be effective. If the model policy, and this comes up a lot with tasers, is you see somebody with a weapon, or you see them with a knife, or you see them with a gun, the question always comes up, why don't you use the taser? Well, tasers are not effective all the time. However, a gun or a knife cutting you or stabbing you is effective. So the only time we would ever use a taser in that kind of situation is that there's what's called a cover officer who has his weapon prepared, so if the taser deployment fails, that they can instantly follow up with the next level. So I hope that answers the question.
So, oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Before we get too far away from that, without reference to any particular thing we've heard in the news recently, but to bring some more clarity and practicality to what I've heard already. For instance, let's say, I don't know, what's a distance of 25 feet? I'm bad with that stuff, from where you're sitting to
Roughly to where the other commissioners is.
where the other
the
commissioners
wall.
are. What would happen based on the training module that you just explained if a citizen has a knife at that distance, acting in what you perceive to be an erratic or threatening manner? Maybe you have had a call about this individual, and they're just acting erratically. They have not charged, but they have this knife. You've established that much. What would be, in that situation, the appropriate use of force or meeting that situation if you determine you need to subdue this individual?
I'm glad you brought that up, Commissioner, because that is exactly the distance that we train at. And we could show you a video. At 21 feet, if my weapon is in the holster and somebody is moderately proficient with a knife, they can cover the 21 feet before I can deploy my weapon effectively to stop the threat.
Okay, and let me ask you, what do you mean by, because you don't know if they're proficient or not, they just got it out of the kitchen cabinet, or, you know, they're some expert with it.
Right.
So let's just say they have it in their hand, they're marching up and down, what do you do?
What I'm getting at is if the person is ambulatory, meaning that they're standing on their 2 feet and they appear to be, have the ability to move forward quickly, that's moderately professional.
Okay.
Now, if the knife is tucked in and you can see that from where they're standing that they've been trained in knife fighting, then that's different. But if they're just standing there, say it's an upset person and they're waving a kitchen knife at you, at 21 feet, if that person decides at that moment and they're ambulatory and they want to charge me, if I'm not prepared and I don't have my weapon out, they'll be able to cover that distance before I can shoot them and stop the threat. And that's just a scientific model. Tasers aren't only effective up to 21 feet if everything's perfect. So if you're inside this room where there's no wind and there's no branches and they don't have a jacket on, that's the jagged edge of a taser. So to answer your question directly, at 21 feet, the officer has to have it in his mind at that moment to be prepared to fire upon that person, because that's the only way you're going to stop that threat if the person charges. Unless, now, given just your example, unless there's other factors. If the person is walking back and forth and he's making other statements, then we can have time to deploy, other means. But if the situation is dynamic and you walk into the room and they're standing there with a knife and they're agitated, if they start to charge, you're very limited at that point at 21 feet.
And I think it's important to just think about every circumstance is different, and that's why we do train. And that's why we try to hire, the best people who have the ability to think quick on their feet and make snap-second decisions. So in other words, what Major McMillan is saying, you have to be prepared, because you don't want, you don't want that night for the chief to have to knock on your wife's door and say, you didn't make it home because you weren't prepared. because you were standing there hoping for the best, and the person ran forward and stabbed you. So you have to be prepared. However, these officers are constantly scanning a situation for reactions, for body language, you know, for anything that can give them a clue. And, you know, what I wish we could do, and maybe at some time we can, is bring you all out to the academy, put you on the FAT system, which is a computerized decision-making, shoot, don't shoot system, and to see the split-second decisions.
Did you call it the FAT system?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Because the split-second decisions, and you can be looking at something that seems to be one thing, but actually is something else. And the film clip that they showed us at the FBI is one that probably most law enforcement officers have seen. It's a narrow walkway. There's an officer confronting a party that is armed with a long gun. There's another officer behind the party looking around the corner of the building. The individual lays his long gun down, and the next thing you know, the officer facing him shoots him. Well, the reaction from the audience was, you know, they were appalled. What they didn't hear, that we are trained to hear, is the officer behind the armed party saw that he had a gun in his hand and yelled gun, and that's why he shot. So, you know, there are a lot of, you know, different factors. So there's not, we don't say, if someone faces you at 25 feet with a knife, shoot them. We don't say that. But we say, you must be prepared to take the appropriate action.
Let me ask about another training issue with regard to that Officer McMillan brought up. Whether or not that officer confronting the person with the knife 25 feet is alone at the time. What is the procedure about calling for backup? Because maybe in that situation, you know what you're going into, as opposed to just cruising down the street and you see this. Let's say you've been called. Would only one officer be sent? Because it seems as though the more officers you have, the more options you have with regard to your decisions about use of force and when to deploy and what to deploy.
Yes, ma'am. Our policy would be to always send at least two. So on a call like that, we would have 2 officers sent to the call. And then the officers, if they get there and they have the time, then they would call for backup and have more officers. Because you're right, the presence is part of our force continuum. So the more officers we could get on to have other means to settle this person down, we would do so.
So, you know, when you talk about training, there's, you know, training on the technique, and not only do they train on the techniques, but they review this use of force policy every time, you know, we're getting ready to recertify. And like I said, it's 15 pages, it's pretty daunting, but it is very well thought out. It's, you know, it's shaped on the model policy, as he said, that is a standard for professional police departments. And we review it once a year to make sure that it's still serving the right purposes. So the training is, you know, we take very seriously. What we have to remember is we do train a lot on firearms. Fortunately, you're going to talk to a lot of officers who say they go through their whole career and don't have to draw their firearm. So we also have to make sure that we're training on all those other techniques, the control techniques, the muscling techniques. You asked about the chokehold. You know, chokehold, what a chokehold does is it cuts off the airway. That is not, you know, that is considered lethal force. We train on what's called the shoulder pin, which cuts off the blood flow, and it's a very precise training. Cuts off the blood flow. The minute someone starts to go limp, you release. They're under control. If you are fighting for your life as a police officer, you got to use what you got to use. And if they can justify and explain why they had to do that, then they're going to be okay. So you have to understand, and I think I mentioned earlier this morning in a meeting, we're a very busy police department. You heard the stats of the gun crime. We got a lot going on. And it's very, you know, it's important for us to remember force is part of what we must be involved in. But every person that we're involved in isn't going to create a need to use force. And when it comes right down to it, a lot of the calls that we go on when we do need to use force, it results in a use of force, I always say, these officers are not going there to referee a bridge tournament. It's serious stuff. It's serious stuff. And so we train them so that they can make the right decisions, hopefully. But, if there's a person in this room that can't admit that they've been in a situation and everything didn't go perfectly, then you probably, haven't lived past the age of 5. So, we want to give them the tools and the training to make sure every situation comes off textbook perfectly. Fact is, sometimes it's not going to.
While you're on that stat, was it 3%? I'm sorry.
No, Commissioner Maddox is next. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Was it 3% in the 2013 stats that actually resulted in deployment that ended in lethal force, or 3 incidents?
3 incidents.
Okay. That's still good. The regrettable, but in terms of your explanation and the numbers, as opposed to 15,000
Right.
incidences, I just want to clarify. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, no, you're welcome. We can
Can-
take some more questions.
Commissioner Maddox has a question
Okay.
or comment?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say, Chief Hansen, I appreciate the presentation that you just brought. That was very enlightening. And then I also wanted to say, with mental health issues on the rise in America, are there trainings taking place that instruct all officers on dealing with and identifying mental illness?
Right.
And then is there any mercy for the individual?
Any mercy?
Any mercy for an individual who has a mental illness?
Okay. And one of the things that Commissioner Townsend asked is that we would talk about those kinds of trainings, so I can move right in there and talk about that. You all probably have heard of the Crisis Intervention Team, CIT. That is a program that was started in Nashville. It's been very successful. We have modeled that program, trying to eventually get as many of our officers trained in that program as possible. It gives you skill in how to deal with people that are in a mental crisis. It also goes beyond that to resources. It's a 40-hour training, and it is very difficult to get officers through that quickly, because that's 40 hours when they're not on duty, so small groups, small trainings. So to answer your question, we're working on that. We know that a large number of the people that we deal with, and we see them out here every day, suffer from mental illness. When it comes to the mercy issue, someone who is having a mental crisis can shoot you or stab you just as easily as someone who is 100% completely sane. So we don't ask an officer to make that split-second decision if he is being threatened. Where CIT works is when you arrive on a scene and you do see that someone is in that crisis and you're not in an immediate threatening situation, then you have the options to use the skills that you've learned in that class. We now have, and we partner really closely with Wyandotte Inc. on this. They're pivotal in helping us train the officers and keep that program functioning. And we have an employee who is an employee of Wyandotte Inc., but she works at the police department, who is a CIT co-responder. And so she responds with officers when they get a call that appears, or it's obvious that it does involve a mentally challenged person who's going through a crisis. She also does follow-ups with those people to make sure, and to help their families afterwards. So it's an important thing to us, but I think, if you're gonna hear my honest opinion, that doesn't give anybody a free pass when it comes to threatening another individual or a police officer. So you hope that then you have the opportunity to intercede so it doesn't happen again, or so they get the help that they need.
The other component of CIT that I think is very important is it gives officers an opportunity to do some assessment. So when people are involved in misdemeanor crimes especially, whether it's loitering or urinating in public or doing something else of that nature, it gives them, we now have a full-time 24-hour crisis center at the old Rainbow Center that the state is helping to fund. And it's a joint effort with Johnson County and Wyandotte County. a state-of-the-art approach, really, where you can bring someone who's in crisis, rather than bringing them to the jail at $92 a day. You can actually bring them to a crisis center where they can get help. They have case managers. They can get them back on their meds, as long as they're not violent offenders. As long as we have 40% of the people in our jail who are mental health patients in misdemeanor crimes, there are some people who have mental illness who need to be locked up because they've done violent crimes and are not safe to be out. But there are a vast majority of our mental health patients who have committed low-level misdemeanor crimes that we're trying to redirect. The sheriff has been very active in this. The police department's been very active in this. And it's been a wide-ranging partnership. And that CIT training is critical to lowering our costs on the jail side. And it's one of those few times when you can actually do the right thing and save money. Often doing the right thing costs money, and this is a program that's working. So I want to commend the police department and the sheriff's department for their work. And the trainers on the fire department have recently reached out because a lot of ambulance calls are calls for mental health services. And having an option with the ambulance not to just take someone to the hospital and to the emergency room who doesn't have insurance, you know the routine here, but also to have an opportunity where they can take them to the mental health crisis center and get them help. The fire department has already reached out to Wyandotte Inc. to look at training for their first responders as well. So it's a very good program that's going on nationwide, and I'm proud of our community for stepping up for that.
Well, thank you. And that I need to know that too, so I could, if someone has an issue, I can refer them
That's right.
to those services. But in regards to Mike Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, if we want to prevent that, is it possible? And if it is, I challenge the police department, the sheriff's department, and the local school districts to put on assemblies for students, just maybe explaining what the procedures are when you're pulled over, because it is my fear, and I believe that it is other people's fear, that Ferguson, Missouri will have a post-traumatic swing on a lot of different students. So if you're pulled over, you may act a little different. You may be a little grouchy from, be a little different. And so I challenge, if possible, for us to be able to maybe put on some assemblies within our local school districts that explain the importance of complying with officers when you're being apprehended. And so often we will be in these circles, and I've said in a lot of them in the last 2 weeks about how do we prevent Ferguson, Missouri. But let's be honest, the person who was killed in Ferguson was an 18-year-old. He's not sitting in a lot of those meetings. So how do we reach them at their level, which is at the high school level, which is at the middle school level, and just explain to them the importance of complying?
That's an excellent idea, and we've heard that from several different people. I think they used to do that in the past, and I'm not sure why, if that program has fallen away. But we have a great pamphlet, What to Do If You're Stopped by the Police, and I think I gave you all a copy of that. We'll take that program, anywhere. One thing I will say that I heard a very wise person say at one of my meetings was, it's all well and good to go to the schools, because we tend to do that because those are the kids that are easy to find. But what about the kids that don't go to school? What about the kids who are really in trouble? So we need to do a broad reach out, and that's part of what the future I think holds for all of us. Yeah.
All right.
One of the ways to reach out to these at-risk children or children that don't have the greatest of role models is the OK program. And it's, we have Officer Mike Simmons, who's out at Coronado. And that is one of the ways that you have an officer in contact with these children on a daily basis, and he's able to talk to them and tell them how to respond to the police, whether it's at a party that's being broken up or in a car stop. So that program is something that if you all can do anything with it, it's a good one to continue, because these children are constantly in contact with that officer. And we also have, we're doing different things where people are actually going out to the churches and speaking, and that's one of the things I think it's very important for those things to be brought up at the churches. And many of the pastors that were there, all the pastors have made a commitment that they're going to start working with us and trying to do that type of things. I just did that at my church this Sunday. Was able to reach out to a group of young men and kind of explain Ferguson to them, and what they thought was completely different from reality, but they were very receptive when it was explained to them. It wasn't taking sides or the policeman's completely correct. They were explaining that, but their greatest concern was not so much that they actually weren't even taking up for the actions of Mr. Brown. They were just misinformed what the police could do and procedures, and when it was kind of explained to them one-on-one, they were very appreciative of it and non-judgmental. So we're going to do a whole lot of things like that, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, let me touch on a couple of the other things that were on Commissioner Townsend's list, and then, we can open it up and ask questions of any of the people that we have here, and they'll be very helpful. She wanted to know, she had a question, and she mentioned earlier that she gets some complaints about how some of her constituents are treated or engaged by officers. And, we're getting ready to start a big initiative. You all, as one of your goals, and the mayor and Mr. Bach have passed those down to us, have this whole issue of customer service as, a very top priority. So we decided the way we're going to tackle that is we're not just going to talk about customer service, because sometimes these people don't see themselves as our customers. We're going to talk about courtesy. So we're getting ready to start, a big campaign about, how we treat people and the impression that we make. Because this is what I tell, my officers. Each and every one of them is an ambassador for the police department, an ambassador for the UG. And sometimes we only have one chance to make an impression. And usually that impression comes from a traffic stop, or, it doesn't always start as a positive encounter. So we have to work hard to turn that around so that at the end of the contact, people go, wow, that wasn't all bad. So that's going to be one of, of our big pushes is, how we treat people. When we were talking on the phone, you mentioned the bad language. And I would like to tell you, that we will just wave a magic wand and you will never hear any bad language come from an officer. I'd
like to borrow that wand when you're done with it.
Okay, that's good. And we can
I
both
don't
put
think
it-
that's a good idea, man.
Yeah. We can put it to good use. But, here's the fact of life. Remember what I said, cops are people. And, we encourage them. We say, we want you to treat every person you come in contact with respect and dignity. When they get to the point that they show you they can't relate on that level, then you do what you have to do. Sometimes, I never encourage bad language, but I'm never overly critical of the officers when they say, I couldn't get them to listen to anything else. That's the way they were communicating, and I communicated. Or they just get pushed to the level, where some of those words come out. So I think, one of the things that that we're doing is for 3 years, the officers have asked to be allowed to wear an outer vest. And I left that in my car. Yeah, could you go get it? I'm parked in space 13. It's in the back end. Anyway, the timing, when you see this, you're gonna go, wow, that looks a little maybe overbearing. The timing, I told the clothing allowance committee, wow, this timing is not good, because they came to me right in the middle of the Ferguson issue, where people were very much spun up about the militarization of the police department. However, I told you how many gun crimes are out there. These vests will provide a level of safety that we need out there. So my deal with them was, I'm going to go ahead and approve putting that on the clothing allowance list, but here's what I want in return. Because to me, it's not the way you look that's the most important thing, it's the way you act. So when you put that vest on, I want you to guarantee me you're going to have put extra effort into the way you treat people and the amount of courtesy that you're using. So when you see this vest, I wanted to make sure that you guys got a look at it. I told Mr. Bach that this was happening. So I don't like to, and no surprises for any of you. So when you start to see them out there, and you will see them, some people are wearing them right now. I wanted you to be prepared. So as far as training is concerned and communication, we are working on trying to turn that into as positive of a contact for every contact as is possible. We teach communication skills in the academy, and then every year we have active officer training, And, you know, we've had verbal judo, we've had different other courses on how to engage in a positive manner. One of the things I hear from the community is, why don't these officers get out of their cars? Walk into a business or walk up to a gathering. And, you know, that's something we are really pushing. But I will tell you, young officers, verbal communication is not their chosen mode. So it's, you know, we have to make a concerted effort. And I will tell you, we put them in a police car and we say, here's your computer, here's your camera, here's your radio. Now get out of the car. So we're working on that. You know, we have we're working a little bit at cross purposes for them, but that is something that we've heard on a regular basis from some of our members of the community, and they have issued invitations. And I told some people today, Mr. Wilson, very nice man who owns the barbershop at 32nd State, said, I have young men in here every day. It would be great if a police officer would just stop in for a few minutes. So ever since that meeting, which was over a week ago, every day I say, I'm going to go down there. And then every day I look at my watch and I say, oh, shoot, that barbershop is closed. But what we're encouraging our command staff to do is to contact a young officer and say, hey, meet me here. Because, you know, sometimes it's easier to go in with someone when it's unfamiliar territory. Can you model that? Anyway, what we have chosen is the navy blue, not the black, the navy blue that will match our pants.
I appreciate the fashion consideration.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
We want to be
It's
the best dressed police force in town.
It's a true consideration. One of the things that you're going to hear police officers, those of us who are older, talk about is, oh, we got a bad back, we've got this. You know, wearing all this weight on your waist for decades can be very damaging over the long haul. Getting some of that off of your belt and onto this vest, we think will be a great advantage health-wise for officers throughout their tour of duty and then beyond. After they retire, they're not going to be like me with this, you know, bad back. So this is what you can expect to see on some, not all, officers. But one of the things that shocked me when I got here is the fact that we do not have a mandatory wear policy, because we don't purchase the vests. We don't demand that officers purchase the vest. It's on their clothing allowance list. Now, you won't find too many officers, especially the younger ones, that don't have a vest. But we put out a survey, and they did this before I got here, and said, do you wear a vest? Yes, no. If you had this option and you don't wear a vest now, would you? And the response, yes, was overwhelming. That's why we have authorized this. I want a vest on every person so that we don't have to worry about those 400 and some odd gun crimes leading to an injured officer, or worse, a killed officer. Thank you. You did a nice job.
Let me just make sure I'm clear on this. Under what circumstance should we expect to see the vest? This is just part of daily authorized
Yes.
attire now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
In any particular areas of the city or
No,
all over?
no.
Just whoever has it?
You'll see them all over.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll see them all over. So,
And not related to a particular type of call?
no, when they go on duty, they put
It goes on? Okay.
Now, the nice thing about this is, the other night when we had the big community event, Night Out on Crime, and it was, you know, very, very hot. And, you know, our motorcycle officers went home, took off their undervests, and then came back. If you wear this, you can take it off and cool off when you're in a safe circumstance like that, and then put it back on. You don't have to get all in it. So, it's got some advantages.
Commissioner
yeah.
Murguia had a question.
No, she answered it. I was unclear.
Can you
at
talk
first.
directly into the microphone, please?
Sure. So Chief, I was just a little bit unclear. So right now, they wear those real heavy vests underneath their clothes, right?
Right.
Because I've seen those. And then, so this would take the place of that. And you may have said this, but I believe, if I remember right, I think I did something a long time ago at the police department where I actually had one of those internal vests put on, and they're really heavy. Is the one that you're wearing right now really heavy?
It's heavy, yeah, it's heavy.
To answer your question, it's the same panel that wears under the shirt. This is just called an outer carrier, but it's called a load-bearing outer carrier, so that the officers can take the 17 pounds that we wear along our waist and then place most of it on this so that you have more pinches on the side and the shoulder. So you're taking that weight and you're redistributing it on so your core carries it. And we found that it was much more effective for the officers, less fatigue, they got less tired. And then as you saw, it's quickly, you can don it real quickly or you can duff it. So when you go into like the station for lunch, you can pop the sides open and let it breathe. So it's the same panel, same weight, it's just, you know, it takes that weight and spreads it out better.
Okay, thanks. I was just curious. Thank you.
Okay, we're getting close to the end here. I just want to spend a few minutes more on training, and then I want to talk about the officer-involved shooting protocol and investigation, and then the complaint procedure, IA procedure. So is Acting Lieutenant Colonel Davenport in the room?
Right here, ma'am.
Looking
right at you.
I'm sorry. I just want you way in the back of the room.
Sure.
Okay, we need to have you come up here.
Sure.
And Lieutenant Colonel Davenport is going to talk to you about the officer-involved shooting protocol and investigation.
Okay, thank you. And I too want to thank the body for giving us this opportunity. It's always nice to be able to explain what it is that we do. So, officer-involved shootings, we treat everyone as a major case. Every officer-involved shooting is investigated by the major case team. And there is no statute. So if an officer is involved in a shooting and unfortunately or tragically has to use lethal force, there is no statute for officer-involved shooting. It's homicide. So if an officer kills somebody in the line of duty, we in the major case unit, we work up a straight homicide investigation. We call out the major case unit, we call out the district attorney's office, and typically it's Mr. Gorman himself that comes out on every officer-involved shooting. And if he's not available, usually it's one of his co-deputies. But the major case unit treats it as we would any other homicide. We collect all the facts, we spare no expense on major case investigations, including overtime. That's a big chunk of the department's overtime is major case investigations. And we let the facts fall where they may. We talk to witnesses, we collect evidence, we prepare a case file, and we send it to the district attorney like we would every other case, and it is captioned homicide. And there are a couple of minor distinctions with a officer-involved shooting as opposed to a non-officer involved shooting. And it's really designed for the integrity of the investigation. In most homicide investigations, we prepare a case file, we collect the evidence, and we submit everything to the district attorney's office. And at that time, we have what we call a charging meeting. We all sit around the table. We, the major case investigators, the detectives, the captain, sometimes the coroner, the district attorney's senior leadership team, and we talk about the facts of the case. And we put forth what we think happened in the case. But in officer-involved shootings, we don't do that. We have no contact. After we work up a case and we send a homicide file to the district attorney's office, we're done. We have no contact, there's no roundtable discussion. It's all in the interest of transparency and integrity. We back out of it. And until the prosecutor says that it was justified, from our purposes, from a practical, utilitarian, in the streets investigation purposes, it's just a shooting case. And there are no special protocols, procedures, benefits that an officer might have if he or she is involved in a shooting. And that's pretty much how those cases work. And we also have, after the criminal investigation, and it is a straight criminal investigation, a homicide investigation, when that's concluded, and after we submit the file to the district attorney's office, we do have an internal body, officer-involved shooting team. We review the facts of the case for administrative reasons and for training reasons, and if there's a policy violation or whatever. But as far as a criminal case is concerned, there's really no distinction between how we work an officer-involved shooting and how we work an other type of shooting.
Is there a protocol in terms of suspension?
There is a protocol, and the officer that's involved in a shooting every officer that's involved in the shooting is, as a routine practice, is put on leave with pay until such time that we get a ruling back from the district attorney's office. And in addition to that, even when we do get a ruling back from the district attorney's office, and if the district attorney says, yes, it was clearly justified, then the officer is cleared criminally, but we go beyond that. We also send the officer to meet with a licensed psychologist, and we have them perform what we call a fitness for duty exam, because we want to make sure that the officer is okay. And the chief mentioned how it changes an officer's life. I would tell you, as a young patrolman, I was forced to shoot and kill somebody because he was stabbing an 8-year-old girl. And it's very traumatic. And so we want to do everything that we can to make sure that the investigation is fair and transparent.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Davenport? So thorough your presentation.
Yeah.
No questions. Thank you.
He knows his stuff. Yeah.
That's good.
He knows his stuff. That's good. That's why he was speaking on that topic. Okay, citizen complaints. There's a lot of activity that can generate complaints. And if you look at this little pamphlet that we have, and we make this, very available out in the public, this little form is called Citizen Complaint and Commendation Process. Because, it is not beyond reason to think that someone maybe won't take the time to call me and say, hey, this officer did something good, although I do get calls like that. So it is a citizen complaint and commendation process. Explains it very concisely, very, I think, clearly. It talks about anyone who, has any reason whatsoever that they want to file a complaint. Anybody can file a complaint. And basically, they will fall into 3 different categories, and those are spelled out here for you. Administrative, it's going to be an administrative IA investigation, and that's investigated by the Internal Affairs Unit. And what that unit is, it's a captain and 2 detectives, and those detectives are chief's pick. We get to pick the best, the most trusted, and these people work very hard. They do, an outstanding job. So they will investigate the administrative complaints, and they have 120 days to complete that investigation. Then there is a division commander review, and that's what most of our complaints fall into that category. Doesn't rise to an administrative or a criminal investigation. It is sent to the division commander to investigate, to talk to the complainant, to talk to any witnesses, to interview the officer, and then make a determination. I see every one of those. I see every complaint that comes across. So as do the commanders, the division commanders and the bureau commanders of every division. The 3rd category are criminal investigations, and that is any kind of a complaint that could result in criminal charges. And that is investigated. It is then turned over to the district attorney's office to make the determination if charges will be filed or not. So those are the 3 categories. I hear a lot from the community that people are uncomfortable making complaints. They're worried about retaliation. And for us, we need, that's part of that community trust that we were talking about. We won't know about these if people don't make a complaint. We try to make it as easy on people as possible. So you can see here, you can make complaints 24 hours a day. If you don't want to come in, if you don't want to talk to somebody, you can call the police conduct hotline, and you can make that complaint in English or in Spanish. And then I will figure out how best to follow up on that complaint. We also, I'm not big on anonymous complaints because you can't substantiate those. But if we get an anonymous complaint that is of a very serious nature, we will do what we can to find out the circumstances of that. So I think, one of the important things that IA does is they will have that one-on-one contact when a determination has been made, they will send out a letter and they will say, thank you for filing your complaint, and it either is substantiated, that we don't go into any detail about what the discipline is, or we couldn't find any substantiating facts to support that. Now, I will tell you, I do read all those reports, and some of them are on topics like, the officer smiled, and I think he was laughing at me. You know, so you don't know, I mean, some people's mannerisms can either be off-putting or not. So if we see a pattern of behavior that doesn't rise to the justification of discipline or punishment, we will talk to that officer still and say, you need to be aware that we have this complaint, and here, you know, here's something you probably need to be aware of or work on. So that is something that, you know, for us, discipline serves two different purposes. There are certain acts that must be punished. There are certain acts that will not be tolerated. There are other complaints that indicate this person needs some correction, some redirection, some training. So we don't make it well known, all the details of discipline, but the one thing that I can tell you is we take it very seriously. And we do track if we see a pattern, and if some officers are getting a number of complaints, or there are a number of indications that they are having issues, could have a problem, you know, we'll follow up on that. Major Davenport mentioned the fact of the psychologist. We have officers sometimes that we refer and say, you need to go talk to someone to work through something. And I'm very proud of our profession, because when I was a police officer, you wouldn't do that. You know, that was your big black mark. Nobody wanted to go. Nobody wanted to admit they had a problem. We are working very hard in this profession to establish the fact that that's nothing to be ashamed of. Admit you have some issues. We're going to help you. We're going to stand behind you. So I think that's a big move in the right direction. So any questions on complaints? Yeah.
Commissioner Townsend? Commissioner Townsend.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. For the benefit of those who may be in the audience and don't have access to the pamphlet you provided, or those of our citizens looking at home, if a citizen wants to file a complaint, they can do it by coming into the police station. They can call it in. Is that correct?
They can call it in. If it's a serious complaint, we're going to want them to come into the station so we can conduct an appropriate interview and get all the information.
Okay. Or they can do it by email.
Yes.
Okay. How will the citizen know? Can they obtain a copy of the complaint at some later time? The citizen wants to know, for example, that there is a complaint. Let's say they're calling it in, and it is serious to them. I'm not going to say use anything frivolous. Can the person who made the complaint obtain a copy of it? And if so, when?
No, they will not get a copy of the file and the interviews and the reports. They will get a letter that documents the action. It was founded, it was unfounded.
So they'll get a result.
They'll get a result. And if they, if anyone says, well, I never heard, then, they need to call my office, because I sign those letters every day. And so if there's a gap there, or we've missed one, then, and I'm not going to say that couldn't happen. A follow-up phone call would be welcome.
So if the person who makes a complaint does not document with whom they spoke and what they said, they would have nothing tangible to refer back to.
If they made a complaint and they haven't heard back, we'll have that documentation.
But they can't get it. I guess that was the question I was asked.
No, we will not turn over those files, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not like a police report,
Right.
where you can get a copy of the
It
police
becomes
report.
part of a personnel file.
Oh, that's the distinction being made. Okay. What would be the average time the citizen could expect to hear from you with regard to founded, not founded?
Well,
And I know
I-
they will
there's-
vary depending
Yeah,
upon.
no,
but-
there's different timeframes for all of this.
Okay.
I'll let Major McMillan answer that.
It's 120 days if it's an administrative, and it's 14 days if it's a division. So we have 14 days on most complaints. We'll have to get back with the person prior to 14 days, the complaint, and talk with them about it.
Okay. Is there any appeal process, or before the appeal, any opportunity for the person making the complaint to be heard, and the officer to be heard? Is there a process that allows the complainant and the officer to appear at the same time or at different times?
No, they are interviewed separately, not together. Now, there are some times when it would be the appropriate thing to say, we might like to get you two together, but that's very rare. It's very rare.
Okay. And is there an appeal of your decision to another body or an independent review panel once the decision of the chief has been made?
If they want to appeal one of my decisions, it goes to Mr. Bach. Now, yeah.
Interesting.
Yes.
This is why we're having these
Yeah.
discussions. Okay. All right.
What happens, and I'll give you a good example, sometimes it's hard to follow up on some of these. We had a complaint that sounded like a very serious complaint emanating from an investigation, and it turned out the phone number the person gave was a fake phone number. The address was a vacant lot. We can't do anything with that one.
Okay.
So some of our complaints actually come from the mayor's office, from commissioners, from Mr. Bach, if a citizen calls and has a specific complaint. So we take them very seriously. And I'm going to tell you that many of them, somewhere between what is actually initially reported and then when you go back and talk to the person and explain police procedure to them, because some of it is procedurally, they have complaints about, I shouldn't have gotten this ticket. Or, I got this ticket because. Why didn't the car in front of me get a ticket? So sometimes we explain the process. If their complaint is with the process, then they're satisfied.
Okay.
And my personal philosophy is sometimes people will come in and say, why did you spend so much time talking to that person who seems to call here every week? Well, my philosophy is if I listen to them and if I can help them understand, or if merely by me listening, they feel better, because sometimes people only want someone to hear them. So that's what we're about.
Okay. I don't want to put the administrator on the spot, but if someone appeals the chief's decision to you, what's the process for you coming to a decision?
My process is that, one is to listen to what the situation is. A lot of times a citizen will go through and explain about what's happened when I first encounter with them about their appeal. And they've talked to the police department. They've gone through a lot at that point. I will then proceed to go through and look at the police files or talk with the commander, typically, that oversaw the situation and went through it. Determine whether or not I think there's something done in that process that may have been wrong, that may need additional review. If that's the case, then I would request that to be done. If everything appears to be in order about how the review was done, I will get back in touch with that citizen and let them know.
Okay.
And I might not have explained that very well. These are not my rulings or my decisions. They go through several different layers. I merely review to make sure everything has been done, and if I concur, I concur. I haven't seen one yet that I thought was not handled correctly in my time here. So you have division commanders that review, then it goes to the bureau commander, it comes to me. If you have an IA investigation, the IA team investigates that. It goes to the bureau commander for his review. He makes a recommendation on the appropriate discipline, or if it's unfounded, the fact that it's unfounded. If it is founded, then it comes to me, and I make that final determination on the discipline.
After you have made your decision, if the citizen who filed the complaint is not satisfied, they would come to the administrator. How would they know that? Do they get a notice from you that says if you're not satisfied with this, you go to the administrator? How do they know to go to Mr. Bob?
Usually, they would call and say, I'm not happy, I don't agree. That hasn't happened since I've been here. So I don't know how often that would happen. And then I would refer them on.
And I appreciate this. We're trying to cover things that may or may not have happened, but just so the public knows. And I'm learning a lot too, so thank you.
Do you have something related to that conversation?
I do.
Okay, let's stay on that train of thought. Hal Walker.
And I'm going to defer to legal. It used to be that any administrative agency within local government, if a person was ultimately dissatisfied with the final decision, in this case, Mr. Box, there is the right to appeal that decision to the district court. Now, I'm old and the law may have changed, so.
Several
It used to
times.
be a limited review, and that limited review is confined to whether there are sufficient facts to support the decision, not whether they could have reached another decision, not to substitute a judgment one for another, but are there facts that support the administrative agency? And no one is deprived of their right to pursue this in a state or federal court by the internal affairs investigation. In fact, a lot of litigation, there are attorneys that simply bypass that process altogether and go right to court because they've reached some predetermined answer. So there are more avenues if a person is persistently aggrieved by what they think is an unfair decision. Jody, Ms. Boney?
It's not happened since I've been here.
I can't ever remember it happening, although I can remember once it being threatened.
Commissioner, do you want to continue that thought?
Well, and probably just to that point, fortunately, these have been rare that have come, and as the chief said, since she's been here, so me as county administrator have not had them. I have taken those calls as the deputy county administrator, I was in that position for a number of years, and there were times when Mr. Hayes was not available, so I did, but they were infrequent that they would come about, and typically it was the disposition of somebody that was looking for the opportunity to make sure a specific issue was looked into, and a lot of times that's what it comes about.
Commissioner Maddox.
Are you good with that response? Okay. I had a question. I didn't really want to change gears, but it was something I was sitting on. We don't get these chances that often. So I had about 6 questions. This is 3 of them, but this is the last one. I just wanted to know, according to the chase policy, what is the current chase police pursuit policy within city limits? We have endured a number of fatal car accidents within this year. What is being done to ensure officer and civilian safety?
Okay, we have actually had 2 this year. 2 fatality accidents that resulted in death, and both of those people that were running from the police faced criminal charges. One of them has already pled guilty, I think was sentenced to 22 years. Our current policy states that we will pursue for dangerous felonies only. That's a change from what it was previously when we were allowed to pursue for traffic offenses. Dangerous felonies only.
Okay, well, thank you, because it's a little scary when your relatives and your friends and family are driving the streets daily, and you read up and you're watching the news, and it's been another fatal accident. I've been watching them, and many of those accidents have happened on 1-lane streets. So, you're speeding down a 1-lane street. Not a lot of places where other civilians can go, so just wanted to say that.
And I think in all fairness to this community and to the officers for our police department, I want to say this. I will take no responsibility nor offer any explanation for actions by other police departments. I will tell you that when we changed this policy, I was pleasantly surprised by the positive reaction of my police force. Did everybody greet it with open arms? No. Has every bad guy since then gotten away? No. These are smart men and women. They understand that. They needed the structure. When the structure tells you you can go all the way from A to Z, an aggressive, hard-charging police officer's going to go to Z. They have responded extremely well and responsibly to this change. What happens in other jurisdictions, I can't explain, or I don't really feel that, we can better spend our time thinking about what we can do here.
Commissioner Murguia.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Chief, I just have a quick question for you. Are you the one that makes the decision whether or not to chase a vehicle or not? Not individual incidents. Are you the one that sets the policy around pursuing felons versus someone that's...
I'm the leader of that effort. I don't do those things in a vacuum. I consult with my staff. We look at what are best practices and then lead that decision-making process. I would never do anything like that unilaterally.
I understand that. I just meant, I was wondering who was the person that would make those decisions. If I remember, the pursuit policy, pursuing anyone was off the table, I think, at one point.
No.
No?
After we had that second fatality, we immediately changed the policy to what it is currently, dangerous felonies only.
Okay, and that's an police administrative decision.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's a policy decision.
All right.
All right, I want to wrap up. We do have a 7 o'clock meeting tonight. I want to thank the police chief and the officers for being here tonight to help us understand this, to walk through the procedures and the policies. One thing I would like to ask, we had a conversation during budget about putting cameras on all the cars. It's an expensive proposition, but something we're working on. One of the things I'd like Chief, I'd like you and your leadership team to consider, a lot of communities are going with cameras on the person of officers on a widespread basis. And one of the things that would be interesting from our department's evaluation, is that something that our department would be interested in? If every interaction is on video, then it can often change the behavior on both parties. It can also give coverage to an officer if an allegation is made, when you can simply run the tape back and say, here it is. So I'd ask you to consider that. There's probably a best practice out there about how that's done. It seems like a very expensive option that we would have to discuss, but I will say paying out a settlement for use of force is very expensive, and if we can prevent one settlement, we can pay for the cameras on every officer. So I think I'd be interested in your perspective on that.
Quick comment on that. We had body cameras at the department I was with before. We've had them for, I think, 7 or 8 years. I'm a big believer in them, but I will tell you, it's not as simple a proposition as, I was at a meeting with the U.S. attorney, and he explained it, they're $300 to $700 a piece. Everybody needs to do that. You've got the initial expense. You have to keep them repaired and replaced, and we do not have a robust computer infrastructure for storage and those kinds of things. So you have to look at that. When you talk about best practices, there also have been, we're watching very carefully, because some challenges to that technology related to privacy. When you're wearing them, when you go in a house, how intrusive is that? So we're looking, we're researching. I will tell you that our SCORE team has worn those body cameras for a number of years. And we have one out, I think, being T&E'd by one of our motorcycle officers because they don't have in-car videos. So, we'll look at it very seriously. All those things that help with transparency, I think, are important. And we talked earlier today about transparency. The one thing I will tell you, once again, take no responsibility for what other police departments do. I will tell you that this organization, is very engaged in being upfront and open. And when you talk about Ferguson, I don't like to second guess. I wasn't there and I don't know all the facts. But I will tell you, like we talked about earlier today, the UG and the police department would do a better job, not only working with the community to help calm as much as we could, but to make sure that the community and you all know exactly as much information as we can put out there up front.
And I think that's an important way to close this conversation, because when there is officer-involved shooting or some other major incident in our community, we do have a telephone system. The administrator does send out a phone call to the commissioners to get the commissioners involved, because our phones start to ring as soon as an incident happens. And so it's very important to get the information to the elected body. It's also important, and I've been impressed with a couple of situations already, Chief Hansen, that when there was an incident, that you put together a very detailed timeline to hand out to the press and hand out at a press conference to make sure everyone out there knows everything we know. Now, there's information that we can't give out that's under investigation, but we need to make sure we're putting out all the information we can give out to inform the public, to inform the media, and to make sure people know everything that we know that we can share. And if there's more that we can't share, we need to simply say, there's more that we can't share. But it's under investigation, and I think that level of transparency does a lot to build trust, because in the time of a tragedy, the next 24 hours are critical in terms of the information we get out and the response that we have as a community. The training, there's all these levels. The training beforehand, the in the moment judgment of the officers, and then what we do in the days and weeks afterwards are critically important. That whole process, I think you've covered that end to end tonight, and I appreciate that presentation. And I would invite the commission, if you have additional questions of the chief, to reach out directly. But there will also, if there's an interest by the commission to reviewing this again or coming back to making sure that we fully educated ourselves and the public, I'm committed to doing that. We want to make sure, this is important, and we want to make sure we take all the time necessary so that we're comfortable with it and that our public is comfortable with the steps that we're taking. So again, I want to thank the chief. I want to thank Commissioner Townsend for initiating this conversation, and I want to thank all of the commission for your passion about this as well. We have a 7 o'clock now. We do need about 15 minutes to start. We will start our 7 o'clock at about 10 after. So we will start about 10 minutes late. So we will have some time for transition and for our audiovisual people to transition as well. Commissioner Townsend, one last comment.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief, all of the officers who participated at the dais, all in the room, and all who work with the citizens every day to make KCK safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.